One thing that's crazy to think about, I think if you play this game in week 1, I bet UCLA's favored by 8.5, 9 points. All it takes sometimes is a little swing. And I know we haven't seen a lot of UCLA. The one game they played in, they looked like they could have lost to a group of 5 Hawaii team out in the islands, and they were off in week 2. So I know it's a tiny sample size, but I feel like even if Indiana teams of the past, right, that aren't executing like the Signetti team, I should say, in 2 games has done, they wouldn't be favored in a game like this.
No, I saw a stat that it was the first time they've been favored since 2020 on the road.
Who would that even have been against? I mean, Michigan. I know 2020 was a really good team, but who would they have been?
At Michigan State.
Gotcha.
Yep. I don't think this game will be particularly close. And I think that's because of what UCLA showed in week 1. If you watched Hawaii, they don't have really any skill, it feels like. They look slow. They look sluggish. Not necessarily that physical, at least in the first game. Now there's going to be a lot of improvements from them too. Week 1 to week 2, they still have that jump, but Indiana already took that jump and is going to have some momentum versus I bet that it's still like 6-hour plane ride, 7-hour plane ride back from Hawaii. You sit there and stew about almost losing to a Hawaii team that not sure they're going to win 6 games, maybe 7 games this year against a schedule that's not going to be in the Big Ten. You probably don't feel very good about it for a while, and you've had 2 weeks to think about it, and you're coming to play an Indiana team that
is in a rhythm, and you're not. Yes. If you're UCLA, they are the furthest thing away from in a rhythm.
There is no rhythm. That's what I was trying to get to. It felt like their game was clunky. Indiana felt a little clunky, but they still steamrolled. The game was never in question in the first week. Hawaii was just going to win. It felt like the most of the game, and UCLA held on for dear life. So Indiana's got 2 games that were in hand early and have just been able to make slight corrections with positive momentum on both sides of the ball and in the kicking game. I think that they're going to – I don't anticipate this game being very close.
I'm kind of with you, and I'm sure there'll be some people that watch this, maybe not necessarily from the UCLA side, and maybe there won't be anybody who watches this outside of the Indiana side, of course, but it wouldn't surprise me if we had a big enough audience to where people from other fan bases were watching this. It wouldn't surprise me if people get the perspective of, oh, these guys are just homers. They're just feeling good about their team. If you sit down and watch the amount of highly executed plays that there were, especially, and again, it's tough to find really the balance of what to say, what's Indiana versus how bad Western Illinois was. But I think whenever we think about what we've seen in the last 2 to 3 years with Indiana football and the lack of nastiness, the lack of really just overall will to win, and just doing the simple things like blocking if you're an offensive lineman, or, actually scoring on offense. That's something that we've, as Indiana fans, have been clamoring about since Kalen DeBoer left. Indiana's not had a formidable offense since Kalen DeBoer moved on to Fresno State, and look where he's at now, obviously coaching Alabama. And they had a closer than more than how do I phrase this? They were a little closer with USF.
That score was not indicative of how the game was played. I was shocked to wake up and see the score watching late in the third quarter. I think it was like 18-12 or 16-12, whatever it was. That was a football game. And Alabama, I think, similar to how all those bigger teams, they just weigh on you. And that's why the Alabamas are the Alabamas and other teams aren't. It's depth. As a game goes on, you wear on them. Indiana, when I was there, used to feel the same thing with Ohio State or Michigan. Felt like we'd punch them in the face and hang around. And then at the end, the depth just wins games. Their backups are a little bit better than ours, and then their third string's a lot better than ours. That's how you build winning football. But yeah, I tweeted about this, and if you go down Indiana's schedule, and maybe it's not today anymore. Nope. Still is. If you go down on the ESPN app through the matchup predictor.
I saw you reference this. I'll let you finish your point, but this is really intriguing.
Yeah, this is not me. This is not Indiana bias. This is not Never Daunted Twitter accounts. This is the ESPN analytics that are just telling me who's going to win. This is a matchup predictor. It has nothing to do with the spread. It's based purely on the analytics that ESPN runs. Indiana is predicted to win 10 games. According to the ESPN app. This is not me saying it. This is nothing to do with us, John. This is totally unbiased, completely objective. This is a computer that's spitting this out. And I got some serious troll messages. Listen, I say stupid stuff that's very opinionated. This is the app telling me. So you have reason to believe that, Indiana going to UCLA has a 3/5 chance to win at the Rose Bowl. Last year, that game would have been 80-20. You saw what Nebraska just did to Colorado, who stinks, I think, by the way.
Yes, they're horrible.
That team is terrible. Nebraska, number 23 Nebraska, on the 19th comes to Indiana, and the ESPN analytics, John, not me, not you, give Indiana a 57.9% chance to win. That's significant. This is not a toss-up.
This is something that, and again, I don't know exactly what all of these metrics are based off of, but whenever I've gone through these in the past, Indiana is hardly ever favored. Even in years where Indiana's had success, like Tom Allen went 8-4 back in 2019, they were not favored in a lot of the analytical matchups whenever they went 8-4 that year.
You want to see the most interesting change since I looked yesterday? I think
I know what it is because I was going to point it out. Go ahead.
Yeah, I tweeted 10-2, and I think they can beat Michigan. Well, I'm going to hold this up if you're watching on YouTube. You see what that says? That's for Michigan. Michigan.
Basically a toss-up.
52.4 to 47.6. Michigan is probably going to win, but the spread is 5%. We're not crazy. The analytics are seeing a team that's executing at a high level. Players all over the field. That the running back room is deep. Even when the quote unquote scrubs, the guys that are freshmen that have been on campus for 5 seconds, they run hard. They stick their foot in the ground. They run between the tackles. They're fast. They're explosive. They have playmakers at every position. They have a cornerback that probably still hasn't seen one pass all season in D'Angelo Pons or whatever his name is. Is it Pons or Pounds?
It's D'Angelo Pons.
Pons. I always want to say
Pounds would be D'Angelo Pons is already a cool enough name, but if it was Pounds, man, that would just add a little more to it.
That's why I want it to be Pounds. I think it rolled. But that kid, he walks around the field with an air of confidence. Quarterbacks drop back at least in the first 2 games and don't even look at him. When you have it's reminiscent of Tywan Mullen when he was having his big year. You just don't throw it at him, and that makes defense so much easier. You have linebackers that are willing to come up, support the run, and cause all kinds of havoc. You have defensive linemen that are quick off the ball. They have players that the computers, not me, computers, see something that a lot of fans don't want to see yet when they say, oh, well, let's win some games first. And yeah, you got to go out there and win. But I can't remember the last time that Indiana was favored in 8 of the remaining 10 games on their schedule after they were already 2-0.
And one thing that's crazy to add to that, especially about the UCLA game specifically, we talked before the season about how this was a pivotal moment, and it still is, but we saw it more so as like a toss-up. Like this is that 50-50 game that if it goes Indiana's way, then that's the door opens for a really good season. Again, that's also still the case, minus, I think, the 50-50 toss-up. I think at this point, fans, the team, probably even pundits, obviously Vegas, they expect Indiana to win this game at this point. So I think it's just wild that we've already kind of taken a step forward with Curt Cignetti as the head coach to where there is a vibe surrounding the Hoosiers where I would guess, and again, this is just a guess, that most of the fans that are really watching this Indiana football team think that they will go down and beat UCLA this weekend and probably shouldn't have any trouble doing so.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. The people that are paying attention, this is still a very pivotal game because it's the first time you go on the road, you fly across the country, you play in an awesome place.
Yeah, this isn't like going down and playing WKU in Southwest Kentucky, which is that's weird in and of itself, but
this is their first real road trip into one of the most famous stadiums in the world, and you got to go out there and handle business. And Curt Cignetti strikes me as a guy that will ensure that we're handling our business as opposed to sightseeing, but it's transformed into where I think right before the season we talked about it. This is one you really want to get, and if they get this one, some really cool things can happen. You still have a little bit of that nerve just because you don't know how they're not road tested, how they're going to respond. But it feels like a game that you almost not have to win, but really expect to win if you want to do some of the things that I think this team is capable of, even in year one.
And if Indiana does go out and take care of business, let's just say they don't win by 3 or 4, whatever. Let's say they win this by 17 or even more than that. I think anything's really on the table because I really don't think UCLA is going to be that good.
My spread is like 12 in my head. That's where I would have stopped throwing the house at Indiana is minus 12.
Well, if Indiana does that, I think that's the point where you start to see receiving votes in the polls.
Yes.
People on national coverage at least start realizing, hey, there's something going on in Bloomington that hasn't been done since 1920. And that's when, I don't want to say you're going to have a target on your back just yet, but that's when the rest of the Big Ten's going to realize, okay, this Cignetti guy wasn't just talking a load of crap. This dude's really changing things. And that's when it's going to be important to really keep an eye on really how they respond when they play the other big guys. Because then after that, you're going to probably be a little big-chested if you take care of business. You don't want to have a letdown against Charlotte. That sets up perfectly for you to win. I don't see any scenario where you lose to Charlotte regardless, but that sets up a scenario where if you're too big, puffy-chested, you could maybe beat Charlotte by way less than you're actually supposed to. And then, that brings you back down to earth a little bit.
Yeah. We thought the schedule was favorable, but it feels like they get tough games in spurts, and then they get a chance to breathe. And this time you get a chance to breathe with Charlotte, but their bye weeks are perfect. They get some big boys that who knows if you do some great stuff, you've got a bye week to probably have the worst week of practice that you can imagine because they're going to be all over you thinking, we can win every game. We're the best team ever. Cignetti does not seem to mess with that. He was furious, obviously, going in at halftime when you're up 50-3. Like, it's
because all I could think about was the drive that just happened
and I
before that where they scored a field goal.
This morning thinking about it, yesterday thinking about it, and we'll wake up thinking about it until Saturday. And I promise you, it'll be referenced in the game on Saturday. It just, for whatever reason, and I was talking to Laura about this, it just feels different watching them than it has in a long time. It feels like they're so business-like. It doesn't feel fluffy. They go out there and they handle their business. They do what they need to do. It feels like they make a sack, there's a little celebration, and then almost like robots, they go back and line up. Like, it's
the football robot stuff we mentioned about Cignetti. It's instilling that mentality in the entirety of your team.
It feels like the team has started to take shape of the head coach, and he's proven that wins at a lot of levels. He hasn't proven it quite yet in the Big Ten, but the only indicators we have of these two games, you beat a team in FIU handily and don't play that well. And then FIU second week goes out and beats a MAC team by 50. We saw what the MAC was doing this weekend with Bowling Green in Northern Illinois. There's some skill there. Toledo is an awesome, like they've got skill in the MAC. FIU beats them by 50. And then you break a 120-year-old record on offense, scoring 77 points in week 2. The only thing that we have to really base our judgment on is those 2 weeks, A+.